Good evening. Mr. Paranjoy Guha Thakurata is today's guest, and so many things to describe such a person. A stature of he has come to my show. It's my privilege. But before I say anything, I will request our studio to play audio visual on Paranjoy Guha Thakurata. Welcome, Paranjoy Guha Thakurata.
Paranjoy Guha Thakurata is a journalist, writer, and a documentary maker. His work experience, spanning over 4 decades, cuts across different media: print, radio, television, and documentary cinema. He is a writer, speaker, anchor, interviewer, teacher, and commentator in 3 languages: English, Bangla, and Hindi. His main areas of interest are the working of the political economy and the media in India and the world, on which he has authored, co-authored books and directed, produced documentary films. He teaches and speaks on these subjects. He also hosted the chat show India Talks on CNBC India, which ran over 1400 episodes. He has directed short documentary film Coal Cast, which highlighted the wrongs in the Indian coal mining industry. Guha Thakurata was a member of the sub-committee set up by the Press Council of India to look into the malaise of paid news. Guha Thakurata was one of the many well-known people who joined a public interest litigation, the 2G spectrum case originally filed by the Center for Public Interest Litigation by lawyer Prashant Bhushan. He served as the editor of the Economic and Political Weekly from April 4, 2016 to July 18, 2017. He has been a consultant with the web portal NewsClick from May 2018 onwards. His book, Gas Wars, Crony Capitalism, and the Ambanis, co-authored with other eminent authors, dealt with alleged irregularities of the prices of natural gas in the Indian market. He is currently engaged in authoring, co-authoring, editing books, and producing different documentary films over and above speaking and writing on these topics of current interest. Some of these books are Sue the Messenger, Thin Dividing Line, Loose Pages, The Real Face of Facebook in India. Welcome Paranjoy Guha Thakurata today.
So we are about to start our show, and I think we are ready.
Thank you so much, Soumyajit Babu, for that very, very flattering and fulsome introduction.
It's nothing. We'll have another 60 minutes, 70 minutes to talk about so many issues which could not be covered in this audio visual. This is just the beginning. And it's really honor for me that I'm in conversation with Paranjoy Guha Thakurata, whom I met in one of our professional journey a few years back at ITC Chonar. And after that, it's not me, rather Mr. Paranjoy Guha Thakurata gave me the courage to have relation with him. And that is why I could invite him today in this show. This is a very new show, and we hope to have more voices like Mr. Paranjoy Guha Thakurata in such platform, in this platform, face-to-face show, Mujit. And I will start with a very first question. I do not know whether it will be appropriate as the first question, but I think that it will be proper on my part. La Martiniere for Boys, Kolkata, St. Stephen's College, and then Delhi School of Economics. Do you think institutions always have enormous contribution to nurture rebels, quote unquote?
That's not an easy question to answer because there are, within institutions also, there are all kinds of people. There are people who are rebels, and there are others who are very, very pro-establishment. When I was in La Martiniere for Boys, Kolkata, within my fraternity, within my class, there were a number of students who were very, very radical as school students, who subsequently became a part of the establishment. Among my schoolmates were Chandan Mitro, Shopon Dasgupta, In our college down the road, St. Xavier's College, was Shashi Tharoor. They're all well known in their own right. I moved to St. Stephen's College because my father said if you remain in Kolkata, you might lose a year, because Kolkata University was going through a difficult period because of that particular juncture, which was the early 70s, 1971. And I grew up in St. Stephen's College in a privileged lot of people from all over the country and the world. To some extent, I learned a lot from my students, my fellow students, more than my teachers. But what taught me more was that atmosphere. In Delhi School of Economics, there were all kinds of students from all walks of life. But what influenced me was the fact that my last 2 years at the University of Delhi more or less coincided with the emergency. So if there is one person who should get the maximum credit for my decision to become a journalist, it should be Mrs. Indira Gandhi and her son, the late Sanjay Gandhi, because I decided to be a journalist because of the emergency. And today I consider myself privileged because I'm not only a journalist, I'm also a teacher. So I was in 1977 toying with the idea of either becoming a teacher or becoming a journalist. I chose journalism. Much later in life, I also became a teacher of the media. And therefore, I consider myself privileged that I was able to study and was educated in all these well-known educational institutions. But to go back to your question, people become rebels because they want to become rebels. And it often doesn't have anything to do with the institution that they study in. You know, this is stereotyping. It's like saying everybody who studied at the Jawaharlal Nehru University has to be leftist. No, life is far more nuanced and complicated than that, Soumyajit Babu.
You have explained my question really in a wonderful way. And you have also taken my another question in your answer. You referred about the emergency, and from there you became a journalist rather than a teacher, and you became teacher afterward. So, what was the role of media during emergency in your early career of journalism and media association?
The emergency technically lasted 21 months, but the last 2 months things had changed. It was really 19 months from June 1975 to January 1977 that for the first time in the history of politically independent India, that the rulers, the ruling dispensation, sought to curb the right to free expression. It also abridged human rights and many other rights that citizens have under the Constitution of India. Indira Gandhi ruthlessly suppressed dissent. Anybody who opposed her political opponents, including journalists, were put behind bars. But when you look back in time, the emergency lasted 19 months. Today's emergency has lasted much longer, many years, more than 5 years, about 6 years. Indira Gandhi just put people behind bars. And then later on, after the emergency, and even before she returned to power in January 1980, she was repentant. She said that was a big mistake. That was, in fact, she said that was her biggest mistake. Democracy is dying by 1,000 cuts in today's India. The right to free expression, which is a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India, is dying because of 1,000 cuts. I use an analogy which was told to me by a retired officer of the Indian Administrative Service and the Indian Army. His name is Mr. M.G. Devasayam. He said if that was like cutting a goat in the way, it was a jhatka. What we are now seeing is halal, the slow bleeding of the right to dissent, of democracy, the institutions of democracy, including the media. And I never really thought I'd see such a large section of the media so beholden to the ruling dispensation, refusing to ask questions of those in power and authority. And in that sense, we have a slow, creeping, silent democracy that is continuing as we talk today, where dissenters, those who disagree, are called anti national elements. So let me say, I'm proud to be described as an urban Naxalite. लोग कहते हैं हम देशद्रोही हैं, कहने दीजिए, मैं गर्व से कहता हूं मैं जनहित में काम करता हूं. तो let every critic of the government, from farmers to journalists who do not ask goody questions, let them be described as anti-national. We should wear it as a badge of honor. And I must say that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is the first Prime Minister of India who's never ever faced a media conference where people can ask him any question, an unscripted, spontaneous media conference, I beg your pardon. He's granted interviews to selected persons who've asked him questions which he would prefer to be asked. Let me put it this way. Even when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, he had press conferences. But after he became Prime Minister of India from May 2014 onwards, he's never had an unscripted, spontaneous media conference where journalists can ask him anything. And he's the first Prime Minister of India. I cannot think of any other Prime Minister of India who has not allowed journalists to ask him any question that they want to ask him.
Absolutely. We discussed about emergency and media role. This is a very crucial phase when we are going through pandemic situation and facing economic challenges. And how is the media playing their role in this situation? Your views, please.
I regret to say that for some time now, and certainly after the unprecedented and sudden lockdown, which was declared on the night of the 24th of March, a very substantial section of the media has become the equivalent of advertising agencies and public relations officers of the government in power. A journalist, if she or he is true to her or his profession in a democracy, needs to ask questions of those who are in power, those who are in authority, those who are ruling us, those who are decision makers. Regretfully, a very, very small proportion of the media, a very small, a minuscule section of the media is playing its role as those who are trying to ensure there's greater transparency in public life, who are asking tough questions to our rulers, those who believe that the media should hold truth to power and not be agents of the government. So the point is, for a variety of reasons, and we can discuss what those reasons are, the media in India has abdicated its role to be what is described as the fourth estate, to hold accountable those who are in positions of power and authority, to bring about greater transparency in public life, to ensure that corruption in high places is exposed. That role, the media has, large sections of the media has abdicated. And instead, they become cheerleaders. And this very, very substantial section of the media often seems to be more concerned about bashing the opposition instead of asking tough questions to our rulers.
So question has started coming. We will take up questions later on. So our backend will show it afterwards. It's a different question I'll be now asking you. From pure academics to professional journalism, how was the journey near about 4 decades You started from journalism, in between teaching, but you are a journalist. So academics and journalism, these two things, how you are taking it uh, along your path, how you are maintaining the balance, and just this is my question.
Shomajit Babu, I think this difference is an artificial difference.
Okay.
Sometimes, sometimes journalists look down on academics, and academics look down on journalists. Typically, journalists say, "Oh, you academics, you so-called scholars, you speak in a language which ordinary people don't understand. You speak to yourselves. You speak within a small community of people. You use jargon. You use technical words." And the academics, on the other hand, say, "You journalists, you are superficial. You just don't go beneath the surface. You don't go into issues in depth." So I think this dichotomy is a very artificial one, and often something that we should ignore. Whether it be in different parts of the world and also in India, true intellectuals are able to communicate to large numbers of people. You could be an eminent teacher, a scholar, an academic. But if you have something important to say to large numbers of people who do not have your kind of academic background, you should be able to communicate your thoughts, your ideas, your messages, your analyses in a language which an ordinary person understands. A, a journalist, a journalist has to bridge the gap between those who know and those who don't. So, in that sense, if a journalist is able to distill the essence of what experts, or what domain experts, or what specialists know and understand, and communicate it to a large audience without being overly simplistic, without running away from the technical details, but able to communicate the essence, the gist of those ideas, then that journalist is also successful in bridging the gap between those who know and those who don't.
You hosted India Talks at a time when people hardly had conceptions about this type of content in news channels. Time has passed, but we are not witnessing that particular rich content in Indian television media. Has the quality affected quantity?
Maybe it has. I was a full-time idiot on the idiot box from late 1995 to late 2001. Then I guess I evolved a little bit and became only a part-time idiot on the idiot box. And now I think I've evolved a little more and become a very occasional idiot on the idiot box. But wait, Shomajit, in all seriousness, I must say, everybody knows that quantity does not equal to quality. I mean, and the proliferation of television channels in India has not led to an improvement in the quality of television. I mean, look at it. Till 1991, we used to have one broadcaster. It was only in 1994 that we saw the first private players in television news. Today, we are the only country in the world where there are somewhere over 300 television channels which claim they are news and current affairs channels. So what you see on that screen is possibly not news or current affairs. And that's not all. When you move ahead and you look at it, out of maybe 900 odd television channels who have been granted uplinking and downlinking rights and licenses by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, of which, as I say, roughly somewhere around over 300 and around 400 have got this category of being news and current affairs. Ask anybody, can they differentiate between what is news and what is entertainment? We know about the TRP scandal. We can talk about that if you wish to. But between opinion and fact, and I regret to say, and I name names, I have no hesitation naming names, including somebody I've known in a very, very different avatar, and that's Arnab Goswami. I think journalists have not only become part of the establishment, they're not only part of that nexus between business and politics. Journalists have today played a very, very important role in spreading toxicity, hate, right through Indian society. And I regret to say, but it is factually correct. that the same set of journalists who talked about the criminalization of politics, criticize criminals for becoming politics. Today, we need to talk about the criminalization of the media, because there is a section of the media, including television channels, including people who run television channels, who anchor television programs. In my view, they are nothing short of criminals who are spreading hatred among communities. Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India gives the right to free expression a fundamental right to every Indian citizen. The media derives its right to free expression from this Article 19(1)(a). But we also have 19(2), which gives what are called reasonable restrictions on the right to free speech. And one of those reasonable restrictions is that you are not supposed to create enmity among different classes of society. You're not supposed to, do something which will, disturb public order. But journalists have played a very, very important role in not just spreading toxic messages and hate in Indian society, but actually disturbing public order. And I regret to say that there are many in my fraternity, and there is no other word to describe them. They have become nothing short of criminals. And the same journalists who were looked upon as people who would uphold truth, who would uphold the rights of the underprivileged, who would put out the voices of the voiceless, today those same journalists have become objects of hate. The farmers who are agitating on the outskirts of Delhi have said, we don't want the Godi media. Ravish Media invented that, or let me say, coined that term. There are dogs and there are dogs. And this is one of my favorite analogies, and I keep using it over and over again. So if you give me a few minutes, I'll just explain what I mean.
Definitely.
Journalists are told, when dog bites man, it's not news. But when man bites dog, it's news. अगर कुत्ता आदमी को काटता है, ये खबर नहीं बनता. अगर आदमी कुत्ता को काटेगा, ये बड़ा खबर बन जाता. But a lot depends on who the dog bites. Suppose the dog bites Mr. Modi. Suppose the dog bites Mr. Donald Trump. You can be very sure it will be big news. So a lot depends on who the dog bites. Secondly, you must remember there are dogs and there are dogs. Journalists are supposed to be watchdogs of society. So, but when the burglar has come to your home at 3 o'clock in the morning and the dog has started barking, the burglar may not know that the dog can only bark but cannot bite. Kutta ko sirf bhaukna aata, kaatna nahi aata. But there are dogs who sit on your lap and wag their tail. They can wag their tail. आपका गोदी में चुपचाप बैठे रहते, you stroke them, पूंछ हिलाएंगे, especially if the lab belongs to an important political personality, a corporate captain, a big military officer, or even a mafia don. The dog just is quiet and wags his tail. There are other dogs also. There are dogs, who are like the dogs who the Saint Bernards in the Alps who rescue people from the blizzard and snow. There are dogs who can sniff out drugs and explosive substances from a pile of luggage. There are dogs who can help a visually challenged person cross the road. So I ask my young friends, some of whom still aspire to be a part of the media, what kind of a dog do you want to be? What kind of a journalist do you want to be? Do you want to be a watchdog, a lap dog, or an intelligent guide dog? The point is, this is unfortunately what has happened in India today, is that a large section of it has become the Godi media, part of the lap. They sit on the laps of those who are in power.
Absolutely. You have redefined the journalist and the journalism. And my first question was about the rebel you are, how you turn to be a rebel. And you explained, and the way you explained these question also, it reminds me that my first question was very appropriate. Now I will come from one point you used the TRP scam. And when it has come to our discussion, I think it should be clarified. And you are the right person who can clarify what is the TRP scam and what is the actual backdrop of taking this TRP scam, whether it is politically motivated or really a thing to be discussed in the media.
No, it must be discussed, even if it is politically motivated. Again, this is a very big subject. And on some other occasion, if your viewers
Okay.
want it, an entire hour can be spent on just on television rating points
Very
or,
simple with
or television audience measurement. But let's look at the big picture. We are a country of 135 crore people, 1.35 billion people. Almost the bulk of the country's population have at some point of time access to television or watch television, even if it is infrequently. A lot of TV people are now watching television on their handsets, on their laptops, be that as it may. When you look at traditional television, the meter, they were called all kinds of names. They were called people meters. They were called all kinds of names, which is aimed at measuring audience. I mean, which program is being watched by whom and for how long. The samples were very narrow, very, very small. But it did not reflect the diversity, the heterogeneity of a country like ours. It excluded large sections of the population, including people who live in rural India. We have more than 6.5 lakh villages. Many villages, people have watched television even when there's erratic supply of electricity. They watch television which is connected to a truck battery or a tractor battery. But because the sample size is small, because the sample size does not often reflect the heterogeneity of the population, and because the industry, the broadcasters, the advertisers are not willing to pay for a bigger sample, and because our society is so diverse, this system is highly prone to corruption and manipulation, which is exactly what has happened, and which are the accusations against Republic Television. The entire rating system is vulnerable to manipulation and fraud. I'm not getting into the merits of the accusations against particular individuals, but what I'm saying is that the corruption in the system is rampant. I think the industry realizes what is happening. I think the government also realizes what's happening. I don't think there are very easy solutions. We had a private company, Television Audience Measurement. Now we have another organization, BARC, Broadcast Audience Research Council. There are a lot of issues in the way these work, and this merits actually a much longer discussion. But when your rating system is not adequate, when it is prone to manipulation and corruption, when it is so flawed, but people, why are they still running after them? Because there are big bucks. Now you stopped television ratings because you want to revamp the system for the last several weeks. Well, the point is, when you allow greed for more profit and maximization of profits, and allowing corrupt practices because you are desperate to earn money at a time when the media and the economics of the media is really in a mess. I mean, the whole markets have collapsed, especially after the pandemic. So greed, if you allow greed to take the better of you and forget public interest. I mean, this whole is a very, very old story. I mean, are you more interested in showing what is in the public interest, or are you more interested in showing what is of interest to the public? And if you are showing what is of interest to the public, then you are tempted to put out fake news, trash, pornographic, sensational, exaggerated information. And that's part of a longer problem that the media faces. This is not unique to India. It's happening across the world, but it's certainly a problem in India.
Absolutely. You told that TRP scam discussion needs minimum 1 hour, 90 minutes. So we may have another opportunity afterwards. But let me now ask you another question. You have comfortably explored different platforms like print media, radio, television, website, podcast, documentaries. which platform is always at the top of your preference list?
Again, Soumyajit Babu, my personal sort of preferences don't matter. I've worked across the media, across different platforms, across different the written word, the spoken word, and the audiovisual medium. Today's more and more people are consuming information on their phones. As I told you, we have a country of 1.35 billion people. If you go by the latest figures of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, there are about more than around 1.2 billion. That's about 120 crore SIMs, subscriber identity modules. In most parts of India, there are more SIMs than human beings. Some people say there are 500, 600 smartphones. Others will say there are about 700 million smartphones. But the short point is, today that what you hold in the palm of your hand is your newspaper, your weekly, your library of books, your radio, your television set, and much, much more. So we have entered a new era where the old media, the so-called traditional media, the so-called mainstream media has to reconcile themselves to the new reality of the world we live in. Today, close to 2/3 of the planet of over 7 billion people have used the internet at least once. And the internet today impacts even those who have not used the internet. I mean, you may be a poor person and you may still need to use the internet to buy a ticket on a train. You might need it for your Aadhaar card. You may need it for your bank account. You may need it to obtain some public services. So the internet is influencing everybody's lives. So as far as I'm concerned, at 65, I've had to evolve. I've had over the years learned to use different media. And let me tell you, all of them have certain strengths and also certain weaknesses. I mean, I think people read still. They may not read on pieces of paper, or the fewer and fewer people might be reading on pieces of paper, and more people might be reading on screens, whether they be held in your hand or on your lap or on your desk. But it's not that written word or even the spoken word. It has a certain depth, which often the audiovisual medium cannot capture. I mean, when you read a novel, when you read a book, when you hear a program on radio, your imagination, your brain is in a way engaged in a way that watching a film doesn't. I mean, I ask a question to a lot of people. How many of you have read a novel and then gone and watched a film? And then how many of you have been disappointed by the film version of the novel? Because when you were reading a novel, it was only you and that printed word on black and white. But it was not black and white. It was many, many shades of gray and many, many colors. You imagined how people looked, and you imagined how what forests were and how deserts were and oceans were and seas were and how people were. And when you heard a play on radio, and many of the younger generation haven't heard a play on radio, again, your imagination tells you, oh, this person looks like this. But so I believe that all of these have a place in our lives. I mean, look, there is one medium that you can interact with when you're walking, when you're running, when you're bicycling, when you're driving, and you're cutting vegetables and not letting your hands get cut. You're having a bath, and that's the audiovisual or audio medium. That's the radio. That's the you can call it a podcast, you can call it a streaming live video. But the point is, it's just your ears. You don't have to watch. You don't have to hear at the same time. You're just hearing something. So I believe all the media have a certain place, whether it's on a big screen or a small screen, whether you're just listening to something or just letting your brain soak up that written word. So I must say I've learned. I spent, out of the 43 years that I've been working in the media, I did spend a lot of time in the written, as a writer, as an author. And whether it's a radio program or a film, or you still have to write. You still have to write something. So I do give a lot of importance to the written word. But the audiovisual medium has a certain impact also in today's day and age on people, young and old, and also those who have low attention spans. They can't look at a film more than, or look at a WhatsApp video unless it's less than 3 minutes. But the same people can watch a film in a dark studio for 2 hours or 2.5 hours. So again, it's the situation, it's individual preferences and context that matters.
Absolutely, absolutely. You were just discussing about writing, and in every sphere of life you wrote. Even if I'm wrong, please correct me. You have written and co-authored 7 books, published 25 books, and directed over 20 short and documentary films. I do not have the exact statistics, but I tried to collect information from the Google. So first, correct me if I'm wrong. And
No, you're more or less right.
Okay, and I have another request for you. If you have any books on your table, and you can show those books on the screen, then people will love. Oh, that.
This is my last book, which came out in co-authored.
Bengal Club, Kolkata. You released it?
No, it's not in Bengali. It's in Marathi and Hindi. It was released in April of 2019. This is the last book I've published, which is called Corruption, CBI, and I. It's written by Shantanu Sen, who was a former joint director of the Central Bureau of Investigation. The subtitle is More Than Memoirs of a Veteran Scam Buster. So this is my latest book, which I published. But anybody who's interested in any of my books can go to my website, and all the books are listed over there.
I'm going to request all our listeners, if you are interested to get a signed copy of Paranjoy Guha Thakurata on the recent or the past books, please write to him, Paranjoy, Paranjoy @gmail.com, and you will get the signed copy after sending. Yes. Which book was there in Bengal Club, Kolkata, when it got launched?
That was a book which I had written with a young man who was at that time 21 years old.
I remember.
23. It's Shaurya Majumdar.
I was there.
It's called Loose Pages. And it looks like judiciary. It has 2 subtitles. The first subtitle is Court Cases That Could Have Shaken India. And it has actually 3 sets of case studies. One is the Birla Papers, the other is the Sahara Papers, and then is Kaliko Pul's suicide note. Kaliko Pul was the former chief minister of Arunachal Pradesh. It examines the role of the judiciary in the nexus between business and politics. So this was published and released in November 2018. And that's another book. I've also written a book before that, not published by me, which was published by Penguin Random House with Shinzani Jain, and it's called Thin Dividing Line. And it looks at India, Mauritius, and global illicit financial flows. It started out as a documentary. A lot of people make films after writing a book or a script. In this case, the documentary film was first made and then the book was published. And my first book looked at coalition politics with Shankar Raghuraman. It's called Divided We Stand, India in a Time of Coalitions. It's got outdated. This was published, the second edition, way back in 2009. But our whole polity has changed. And this is a textbook which continues to do reasonably well. It's Media, Truth, Fairness, and Objectivity. Second subtitle is Making and Breaking News, and it's published by Oxford University Press. Thank you so
Thank
much for giving me this opportunity to plug my work.
Paranjoy authored a 36,000 word, 71-page report, Paid News, How Corruption in Indian Media Undermines Democracy. And you raised your voice about paid news and problems with Indian media nearly 10 years ago. Have you experienced any change in the system after being vocal?
Unfortunately, not.
No.
The report raised a huge controversy. It was not made public until quite a few months after it was given to the Press Council of India. It was written by me and K. Srinivas Reddy. We spent public money, the taxpayers' money. We spoke to large numbers of people in different parts of India, and including chief ministers. And we talked about how people paid money to completely obliterate the difference between advertising and news, and how this was bad for democracy. It was not I alone. Lots and lots of people have talked about it. The Election Commission has talked about it. But I regret to say, not much has changed. Very little has changed. In certain respects, the situation has worsened, especially after the pandemic, and even actually before that, as large sections of the media have been financially squeezed because flows of advertising have not gone up. Often, in many cases, it's shrunk because the big digital platforms do not give the kind of advertising support that other platforms or the old traditional media where you could aggregate audiences could. And therefore, I regret to say that corruption in the media, it always existed. It continues. And our attempt that we made, and this, by the way, this report is in the public domain. People can just get it from the old website of the Press Council of India. It's called Paid News, How Corruption in the Indian Media Undermines Democracy. And if people have difficulty getting it, I'll be happy to help them out. There have been a large number of articles written about it. There was a deep division within the Press Council of India on whether the report should be made public or not. Eventually, those who wanted to make it public, they lost out. The Press Council of India, unlike parliamentary committees, do not have a convention of expressing dissent or dissenting notes. So the report of the subcommittee, of which I was a part, didn't get released till quite a few months after it was formally put together. But it is now available in the public domain. There was a right to information request made, and the Chief Information Commissioner literally told the Press Council of India to make this report public. And thereafter, it was used by many other people. It's been used in the parliamentary committees and also by a discussion paper of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, which looked at cross-media restrictions. We don't have any of that. Restrictions on cross-media ownership.
We will take a 25-second short break and we'll come back once again.
Namaskar. Soumyajit welcomes you to Face to Face Soumyajit. If you like our show, please visit Face to Face Soumyajit, like it and share it. Also, subscribe our YouTube channel iCommunications. Press the bell icon to get instant notifications.
So thank you, Paranjoy. We have discussed about social media, democracy, democratization. So I will ask you, social media, democratization or demolishing democracy, your views.
I've written an entire book on the subject, and the book again has aroused a certain interest, especially after the Wall Street Journal, after Time Magazine, after Reuters, after BuzzFeed, after Aussie.com, all talked about what was happening on Facebook. Today, we are in a situation where the Parliament of Australia is It has a bill has been tabled to literally force Facebook and Google to pay media companies for the content they distribute and disseminate. Today, in the United States of America, the Federal Trade Commission has initiated a lawsuit which, among other things, seeks to remove WhatsApp and Instagram from Facebook. Earlier, an antitrust suit was initiated by the Department of Justice in the United States against Google. In different parts of the world, in Europe, in Britain, it's also happened. India has, of course, been rather soft on these big digital monopolies, and the big digital monopolies have tied up with Reliance Jio. That's, of course, another story. But the point is, as people like me have been shouting for a long time, in fact, the title of this book that Cyril, Sam, and I co-authored, and which was published in Hindi and later in Marathi, is How Social Media Have Become a Propaganda Weapon and Disseminator of Disinformation and Falsehood. The classic case being WhatsApp. Today, India is the biggest, has the biggest number of users of Facebook as well as WhatsApp. WhatsApp expects to soon start a payment system also. They've received certain regulatory approvals, and some they are supposed to roll out their service in the near future. We have to wait and watch when that happens. There is some pending litigation, but WhatsApp has somewhere in the region of over 400 million users in India, 40 crore plus.
Okay.
That's like what, almost 1/4 of the population, and it's large numbers of people. And WhatsApp has today become the platform to circulate disinformation, propaganda, hate speech, content which goes viral, which is pornographic, which is depicting gratuitous violence. I regret to say it, but behind every major communal conflict that has happened in India in the last few years, every major Hindu-Muslim riot, there is a WhatsApp message. And often there are Facebook posts. Today we have a lot of evidence to indicate that important persons in Facebook in India, that includes the lady who was heading the public policy affairs, Akhi Das, who's no longer, she's put in her papers. She was accused of being soft on the Bharatiya Janata Party, and internal complaints from within Facebook staff, that people like T. Raja Singh, people like your Anand Kumar Hegde, people like Kapil Mishra, that they should be declared as dangerous individuals, that their posts should be pulled down, and they drag their feet. And Akhi Das is on the internal email records have been leaked out to say that she hesitated or demurred or did not pull down this content because it was supposed to be bad for business. That's essentially the problem with the social media. They want virality any which way they can. They don't care whether what is put out is true or false, correct or not. Jhoota ya galat khabar, so long as it goes viral, because that is their business model. The more people view something, that's good. Right now, Facebook monetizes the content, as does Google through its search engine. WhatsApp is an end-to-end encrypted service, so they don't know who's putting it out. They don't know who's getting it. The whole system has been manipulated, abused. Again, this is a subject of a much, much longer discussion. And how, I mean, there have been 2 documentary films that have been made on the subject, and I'd strongly urge your viewers to watch it on Netflix. One is called The Great Hack, about Cambridge Analytica's activities, and the other is called The Social Dilemma. How social media is today completely changed an entire generation. We have a new kind of surveillance capitalism. Our minds are being controlled. So it's not just what we wear, what we eat, the films we watch, the music we listen to, what we read, our political preferences, our ideology, our thought processes, and not just our behavioral patterns, our political preferences are all being manipulated by these two global digital monopolies. And there's also Amazon, there is also Apple, and there's, you add to that the Chinese bigwigs. I mean, when you just look at two of these, Facebook, which includes Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram, and you look at Alphabet, which is really Google and all its different services, YouTube, and very importantly, the Android operating system, which operates in most mobile phones other than Apple phones. These 6 broad platforms account for the overwhelming bulk of all the content, all the information, all the traffic that traverses the internet. I mean, some people say it's over 90%, some people say it's 95% of all the traffic outside the People's Republic of China. Others say, no, this is an exaggeration, but there is no doubt that these are the two giant corporations on the planet, and their business model and their for-profit model is to gather data from you. They talk about freedom of expression, they talk about privacy, they do everything in the name of freedom of expression and privacy, but they're interested in knowing everything they can about you and your behavior, and they want to create a surplus from it, to use the words that Shoshana Zuboff has, the American scholar, to predict your behavior. Yes. That's the business model. That's how they maximize their profits. These are two giant corporations. And should you wish to, at some other point of time, I could hold forth on this subject alone in greater detail. Just as the TRP is an issue for greater discussion and debate, the whole issue of what the giant digital monopolies are doing to all of us, you, me, our children, and their children, is a subject of important discussion. You know, the internet is no longer this great public commons which is helping everybody. So we get not just information, we're getting education and we're getting knowledge. We're not just remembering our friends' birthdays and sharing pictures of our wedding receptions and anniversaries. There is another side to these social media, and that side is dark and dangerous, and people should be aware of that side as well. I'm not saying shut it down, but the very fact that in the bastion of free enterprise capitalism, which is supposed to be America, supposed to be within quotes, you have bipartisan support for different reasons. The right wing and the left wing think that Facebook should be broken up for different reasons. But in America, Standard Oil was broken up. AT&T or Bell was broken up. And now whether or not Facebook and Google will be broken up, time alone will tell. This lawsuit could drag on for years. We do not know what will be the outcome of the bill in Australian Parliament, but to what extent these digital monopolies abuse their power, restrict choice, and influence and exert undue influence on the lives of people is a matter of discussion and debate.
Definitely. And see, we have extracted 2-3 topics which need more discussion, TRP and this issue. So that will be our agenda later on. But now I am going to ask another question. You have been associated with many academic institutions. How do you see media education scenario of this country?
You know, I'm not an expert on the subject. I cannot comment on the new education policy. I don't know enough to talk about it.
Okay.
You know, so all I can say is we are living in a time when there are attempts to rewrite history. There are attempts to completely change the way people look at the past. There are attempts to manipulate how they want to perceive the future, what people should be taught and what shouldn't be taught. This is a subject on which There can be a lot that can be discussed. I'm not competent, honestly, Soumyajit Babu. I'm not competent,
I understand.
leave alone qualified to talk about the state of
Okay,
education.
no issue.
But I know that a lot has to be done. A
Yeah.
lot. I mean, we as a country, the pathetic amounts of money that we spend on education, the the public spending, government spending on education, and the pathetic amount that we spend on healthcare and taking care of our people. I think we should all be ashamed. We should be ashamed. I think no country in the world has been able to progress by spending the kind of miserable amounts that we spend on healthcare and education. I mean, look, Bangladesh is doing better than us, not only in terms of gross domestic product and per capita income, but certainly in terms of healthcare and education. Many countries have certainly done better than India. We have a long, long way to go.
Thank you. If you are asked to advise one immediate reform in our country's economic policy, what will be that one?
Oh my God. More democracy. Democracy is dying 1,000 cuts. A better deal for our farmers. Hundreds and thousands of them are protesting in bitter cold in the outskirts of Delhi. Better way to manage our scarce natural resources, to ensure that oligarchies are weakened. I mean, why should the country's natural resources, the water we drink, the land that grows our food, the air we breathe, coal, iron ore, spectrum, oil and gas, why should they be so badly misallocated, mispriced in a manner in which just a few benefit? Much, much more than the vast majority of the people. These natural resources are public goods. Why has the government, and those, our governments failed to act as genuine custodians, as trustees of resources that belong to the people of this country? To me, this is the biggest challenge that lies ahead, the biggest problem that lies ahead of us. I mean, we've moved beyond crony capitalism. We have a kind of oligarchy where a few rich men seem to be doing very well while the rest of the country is devastated. I mean, we are seeing inequalities widen and sharpen. And to a great extent, this is because of the terrible manner in which we are utilizing or misutilizing our natural resources.
There was a time when political cartoons were a very important part of print media. It was an important form of protest. Nowadays, we find political memes circulating in Facebook and other social media. Do you consider satire can be the strongest form of expression?
I agree. I completely agree. Cartoons, cartoonists, artists, painters, musicians, theatre persons, they're often the conscience keepers of our country. They're often people who, using wit, using humor, using satire, are able to point out some things that others aren't able to. They can tell the emperor that you are naked, that the emperor really has no clothes. So, unfortunately, we are living in such an oppressive atmosphere that those who criticize the government are dubbed anti-national. I go back to where I started. Deshadrohi aap ban jate hain. And even cartoonists, and even those who are cultural personalities, poets, activists, they are being on very, very flimsy grounds, and on very, very draconian laws like the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, are being harassed, being harried, and some of them have even been put behind bars. I regret, I never really thought at 65 I'd see the people of this country living through such an oppressive atmosphere. And there are people, as I was talking, even as we talk, there are hundreds of thousands of people on the outskirts of Delhi, farmers of this country. They are protesting for their rights. They are protesting. And I think that's it's a very important inflection point in the this country, in this country's contemporary history, and certainly during the term of this government.
Thank you. I would like to know one area of Indian journalism or Indian media which is completely different from world media.
That's a difficult question.
Difficult.
You know, I mean, the Godi media is sometimes called the North Korean media. You know, in the American media was absolutely, you know, large sections of it were very, very bitterly critical of Donald Trump, who is in the last few days of completing his term, his 4-year term as the President of the United States. But in the United States, we saw many media organizations. They were very, very vocal in their criticism of I keep saying former president. I forget that he's still president. I mean Donald Trump. I think a far, far larger section, a really substantial section of the media is very, very subservient, even slavish to our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That's one key difference. In terms of ownership, you know, say the richest man in India, Mr. Mukesh Ambani, he's one of the biggest owners of the media. He's the biggest owner of various kinds of media, television channels, websites, and so on and so forth. The ownership of the media, I think that's in one way where the Indian media is perhaps a little different from other media. I don't say entirely different, but perhaps a little different, is that business, politics, and the media have completely come together. They've merged and converged. So other than that, yes, the Indian media, I really wish it was truly less subservient to the ruling dispensation, more reflective of the aspirations of the underprivileged, the poor. Regretfully, it is not. But I do believe that in other respects, yes, the Indian media is similar in many respects to the media in other parts of the world as well. The similarities are more I mean, India's media is more similar. But again, you're talking in terms of differences. Because India is such a diverse country, in that sense, the media, though it often does not reflect this diversity, this heterogeneity, it is nevertheless a part of an extremely plural, diverse, heterogeneous country. I mean, just to give you a very, very obvious example, we're the only country in the world with 17 languages on our currency note, with 21 languages in the 8th schedule of the Constitution of India, excluding English. Our diversity in terms of geography, in terms of culture, in terms of food, in terms of you name it, in terms of religion. I mean, the point is, if 14% or a little over 14% of Indians is Muslim, the very fact that 1 out of 7 Indians is Muslim, what should also be mentioned is that there are more Muslims in India than in all countries in the world, except one, and that's Indonesia. And I regret to say that there are many supporters of the ruling dispensation, including those who belong to the ideological parent of the Bharatiya Janata Party, that's the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, who have sought to demonize 1/7 of this population. I mean, Islamophobia has reached levels which were probably non-existent in India until the late 40s. until I mean, from the time the Indian subcontinent got got partitioned. But to draw parallels to the past, from the past to the past, the partition of India was largely affected Bengal and Punjab, undivided Bengal, undivided Punjab. About 1.5 crore people forcibly had to leave their place. In the months of April, May, and June, I think more than twice that number, perhaps 3 times that number, internally migrated. There are many, many other parallels that we can draw. Because I think in certain respects, Indian society has moved back in time, moved back 7 decades, 8 decades. The Great Bengal Famine of 1943. There was food in the godowns, but people were dying of hunger. For very, very different reasons. Today, the Food Corporation of India has more than 3 times the amount of wheat and rice than what the buffer stock limits would signify. That was the middle of the Second World War. Are we witnessing a Third World War? A technological war between the United States and the People's Republic of China? To defeat Hitler in 1943, ideological opponents, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill came together. In 1945, the Second World War ended. Today, after a gap of 30 years, after almost a period of coalition politics since 2014, we've seen the single party in power, that's the BJP. We've seen the Indian polity being sought to be converted into an American-style presidential system. It is not. We remain a multi-party democracy. But given the vagaries of the first past the post system, winner takes all often, and we have a domineering leader, a dominating personality, and his supporters claim he's the Second Republic, the supreme leader of the Second Republic of India. Let's wait and watch and see what happens in the near future. I mean, Indian society, Indian politics, everything has changed in ways many of us never anticipated. Maybe it's our own fault. Maybe it's our own limitations. But in certain respects, I do sincerely believe that we moved back. Instead of progressing, we have regressed. And unfortunately, that's true not just for it's true for the Indian media also. I'm sorry, I've sort of rambled and held forth at great length to the question that you asked.
No. It's really a great answer from you. You told me at the beginning you can interrupt me, but if I interrupt you, the real thing will not come out. And that is why the show name was Meet a Man of Distinction.
Thank you so much.
So we are going to close our show very soon. We have another 2 questions. Don't you think a third world country like India should be given more importance to development journalism? How we can encourage development journalism?
I think people have to start paying for what they read, what they hear, what they watch.
Okay.
If you want everything free, if you don't give a damn about the intellectual property rights of writers, of artists, of designers, of photographers, then you will be flooded with propaganda and fake news. What is development news? Information that helps the development process. What is development? These are highly loaded terms, Soumyajit Babu. The media has a role to play in ensuring a better life. But that environment in which the media operates, you can't divorce the working of the media from the political and economic environment in the way it operates. If we have a political atmosphere which is dominated by one party, by 2 individuals, if we have an economic system where there are less than a handful of oligarchs who seem to be doing very well, if we have a situation where inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor is widening, then the media reflects all these negative aspects of the working of India's polity, the working of India's economy, and the working of India's society, where we see a polarization along religious lines, where we see intolerance. If those in power have always been intolerant, nobody likes critics. You don't like you don't like your parents criticizing you, even if your parents say, "No, I'm saying all this for your own good. This is not destructive criticism; it's constructive criticism." None of us like to be criticized, but that's human nature. But the media has to play the role of a critic. If it has to hold a mirror to society, it must ask those difficult questions. So when you talk about the role of the media in development, that is a very, very big issue. And there are many, many dimensions to that issue. But in order for the media to play that role, that enabling role, and to actually be an agent of change, to be able to move large numbers of people, the way they think, the ideas, the messages in a positive manner, well, many things have to also simultaneously come together. And the media has to be one part of it. Regretfully, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm repeating myself, a substantial section of the media in India has become no different from advertising agencies and public relations firms. A section of the media has become criminalized, not just corrupt, but criminalized and criminals. And those who are in power, they are not just intolerant of its critics, they are vindictive. They are using law enforcing agencies to target opponents. So if institutions, whether it be the judiciary, whether it be bodies like the Controller and Auditor General of India, the Election Commission of India, the Central Bureau of Investigation, the Central Vigilance Commission, I could go on and on and on, they have all become compromised and relatively weak, and their spine has become soft, a bit too soft and a bit too supple. Then the media is also one more institution which has gone the same way, unfortunately.
Our last question. Public service broadcasting. Don't you think the model of PSB through Doordarshan and All India Radio should be reformed immediately for a more positive outcome?
Indeed. It again goes back to the point I made. People have to want to pay for quality.
Right.
There is need for a public broadcaster. There's a need for a public service broadcaster. And we don't just have to look at the model called the BBC or the British Broadcasting Corporation. There are countries in France, in the United States, in Canada, in Germany, in Australia, where public broadcasters have played a very, very positive role in not just informing people, but in ensuring certain standards in the media. Regretfully, barring brief periods of time, Doordarshan and Prasar Bharati have become just propaganda weapons of those who are in power, the ruling elite, the ruling dispensation. And unfortunately, as I was mentioning, and I repeat, the intolerance for independent, objective, truthful, unbiased journalism has shrunk, that we even see India's largest news agency, the Press Trust of India, under attack from Prasar Bharati Corporation, the government-owned broadcaster, which includes All India Radio and Doordarshan. I regret to say the role that All India Radio, Akashvani, Doordarshan is playing is no different from the role that the same organizations played during the emergency when Indira Gandhi was power. In that sense, our conversation has come full circle. The new emergency, the silent emergency, the unspoken emergency. That was a jhatka. This is a halal. That lasted for 19 months or 21 months. And then the Janata Party didn't last for long. Indira Gandhi was voted out in March 77. She returned to power in January 1980. What we've seen is this democracy, freedom of expression, death by 1,000 cuts. And it's been going on for the last 6.5 years and longer. I regret to say this, but when those in power lie through their teeth, who has to call them out other than the media? One example, on the 31st of March, the Solicitor General of India, in a written submission to the Supreme Court of India, the Chief Justice of India, and the head of the Ministry of Home Affairs, Ajay Bhalla, said there's not a single migrant on the highways of India. My God, these are government authorities who are lying through their teeth. When a fund called PM Cares, you don't know how it works. You know the government machinery is being used to get funds, but the complete lack of transparency in the way it works, the way the Right to Information Act has been systematically undermined, all of these, regretfully, do not bode well for the future of this country. But having said all this, I would like to believe, and the farmers' agitation too gives me some hope, that democracy can revive in India. Democracy can be stronger in India. And sometimes when we are enveloped by darkness, we forget that the darkest hour is just before the dawn. But when that dawn will come, I don't know. I hope it comes soon, but I can't say for sure.
I too personally believe that there will be a greater sunshine before us. And if there is any questions, we will take up. Kindly flash on the screen. Is there any question? Word is still the strongest weapon. Thank you for being an inspiration to this generation, sir. I must say this lady, who is now a visiting faculty of one of the premier universities of Kolkata. I know her personally, and you know I am in a very difficult situation right now. So she researched everything for me. So thank you, Ankita, for this wonderful research.
And Soumyajit Babu, you have just suffered a terrible personal tragedy.
Right.
And I take my hats off to you. I congratulate you for having gone ahead with this discussion, though you have been devastated by the loss of your near one, and you have continued and did not cancel this program. So my congratulations to you as well. And may you be safe and strong.
Thank you. Thank you. And I thank our audience. It's only, I think, 5 weeks old show, but people are liking this show at one point of time. Those who know the digital, I have seen that 670 concurrent views for a 5 week old this Facebook digital platform. Amazing. I can't stop this thing, and I think I will get cooperation of audience, speakers, and everybody. And I must congratulate Gypsy Caravan, the technical team behind this wonderful presentation, and it is being live streaming on 3 platforms. So thank you, audience. Thank you, our guest, man with a distinction, Paranjoy Guha Thakurata. Thank you for coming here and sharing your so many views with us. Thank you very much. Good night. Signing off. Show.
My honor, my privilege, and my honor.